Well, hey, thank you so much for jumping on the Zoom call. I've got Brother Larry here, just absolutely fascinating. He's a retired pastor, and we've all heard of Where is Waldo? Well, I'm going to tell you, where is Brother Larry in the world today? Are you wanting to develop your own short-term mission teams? Or maybe you have taken teams out, but you want to go to a next level of success? Well, what we've done is we've developed this mission packet for you on steroids. It covers from A to Z. It's over 50 pages long. You can download this today, brand it to your own ministry, and modify it to your needs. All you got to do is go to the description of this YouTube video, click on the link, go to our website, and download it today. Get started in short-term missions today. Hey, Larry, thank you so much for joining us on the Zoom call. I just wanted to, have you a part of the Zoom call because I just believe in my heart, mission-minded pastors is so important. And, I think in this day and age, it seems like missions are just kind of not, on the radar as much as it used to be. And, you had a really awesome testimony. So if you don't mind, just kind of share a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you.
Okay. Well, I am Larry Millender. And it sounds just like you spell it, Millender. And just to give you a little background to who I am, I've been a pastor for 31 years. I retired in September 2019 from pastoring one church for 31 years, which is almost unheard of anymore. I see pastors, I know churches that change pastors every 2 or 3 years and pastors that change churches every few years. But I knew when I launched my church, 1989, that I would be the pastor of that church and that church alone. No ambitions to pastor any church. So,
amen.
Been in pastoral ministry in that church for 31 years. Sometime back in the early 80s, late 70s, I served in an associate pastor role. But that was many moons ago, way back when dirt was new. So, but I am Larry Millender. And I'm a retired pastor at this time, but I'm still traveling preaching some.
Yeah. So you're still actively involved in ministry. As far as what you're doing, a lot of times ministers say they retire, but they're still very, very active some way as far as in various types of aspects of ministry.
Well, I'm a spiritual daddy to a good number of young ministers that have been raised up in my church, that have gone out, that are pastoring. They're in music ministry, they're in evangelistic ministry, they're in missions ministry, and there's probably 8, 10, or 12 of those who have been raised up in my church that are out doing full-time ministry. And I speak in their churches, I serve on their boards, I serve in an apostolic role to them, as an apostle to them, and a bishop and an overseer to them. And many of them have me in their life just to hold them accountable so they have somebody to answer to.
Amen. Because obviously accountability is very important.
Yeah, I read a book some years ago, probably 30 years ago, by, I think it was Mark Hamby. It was titled, You Have Not Many Fathers. That book really touched my heart, that I saw so many pastors out there that didn't have anybody in their life to be a spiritual daddy to them.
Yeah.
So I have someone in my life like that. And I'm that to a lot of other young men as well today. Yeah. Even though I'm not pastoring a local church, I'm still involved in ministry a great deal.
Yeah. I mean, my pastor's been in my life for 31 years. It'll be 31 years this August. So I know what you mean. It's important to have that accountability. So, you talked about missions and how important missions was to you and still is to you. If you don't mind, you talked about being a part of Assemblies of Gods, and it's just kind of like bred into you the importance of missions. If you don't mind, just share about that.
Well, I can. I'm third generation Pentecostal. Now, people tell me when I preach like a Baptist-costal, I guess. But I'm a combination of a little bit of everything because I preach in all kind of churches. But being third generation Pentecostal, my wife comes from a Church of God background. I come from an Assembly of God background. And the church that I grew up in, as far back as I could remember, went to Methodist church for vacation Bible school some, because my dad's family is Methodist, but my mom was Pentecostal, my grandma was Pentecostal, and we attended an Assembly of God church. And that church was notorious for always bringing in missionaries from overseas. There was someone coming in seemed like every month, every other month or so, there was somebody from Sierra Leone, Ecuador, Brazil, Nigeria, England, Canada. They were coming in all the time. And that church had a missions budget where they supported a number of missionaries with a certain amount of money each month. And then when the missionaries would come in, they'd take love offerings for them to bless them. So it was ingrained in me early on as a little boy in school, in church and Sunday school, about missions. To me, it was fascinating to hear the stories about missionaries, especially I remember the man who was in Ecuador. He was one of my fourth grade school teachers at one time. He and his sister graduated from Southeastern Bible College in the Assemblies of God in Lakeland, Florida. And they were teaching school, and then he had a call to go on the mission field. So he went to Ecuador. And I remember when he would come home and talk about Ecuador, there was always an excitement in me of one day me being able to do what he was doing.
Yeah.
I didn't have a clue as a boy what it was going to be about. I mean, I was 8 or 9 years old, and I got saved and came to the Lord at 9 years old in a youth camp, in a kids camp in the Assemblies of God campground in Marianna, Florida. And I knew in that meeting, when I went down to the altar, I was saved and filled with the baptism of the Holy Spirit and called to preach all at the same time. I knew as a 9-year-old that I was called to ministry. But always in my heart, there was this desire to go on the mission field. Not necessarily to live, but to go and minister. I want to see what it was all about. Then through the years, there in the Assemblies of God Church, there was always people in and out. We would hear the stories, meet the missionaries from the Philippines, from Japan, from the Caribbean. There were always missionaries. There were some from Nicaragua that came. Sister Peak, I remember, a little tiny lady in the Assemblies of God in the 70s. She was in Nicaragua, and she would come back a couple of times a year and speak in that church that I grew up in. And it was always fascinating. It was always their excitement in me about it. Mm-hmm. And through those years, I graduated high school, did Bible college, did community college and all that stuff, raised a family. And then in 1984, I was serving in a church, I was associate pastor. The Lord told us to go to Rhema. I didn't even know what Rhema was. Didn't even know who Kenneth Hagin was. And to Rhema, uprooted with 3 kids. I said then we moved 1,100 miles away to go to a Bible college we didn't know anything about, founded by a man we'd barely heard of. And I moved 3 kids, a parakeet, a turtle, and a beagle dog to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and relocating my family. But it was there was a gentleman that sat beside us in a lot of our classes from Norway. His name was Augie Olashir, a big guy, big, heavy guy. And I didn't know much about him, but he sat with us through the first year of our school. Rhema was a 2-year school. And he didn't come back for the second year. The first year he was there, he didn't come back. So I missed him. So I inquired how to get a hold of him. And at the school, somebody in the admissions office gave me his mailing address in Oslo, Norway. And I just felt the Lord said, send him $100. Get a money order, send him $100. So I did. I went to the bank, got a money order, mailed him $100. Never heard anything back. Years passed. That was 1985. 1994, after I was pastoring a church, been pastoring a church probably for 5 years, had Rick Godwin. I don't know if you know who Rick Godwin is. Mm-hmm. He pastors used to be Eagles Nest in San Antonio, Texas. Now it's, I think it's called maybe Embassy Christian Center or something. He's got a new name, big church. And I invited him to come speak for us. So he came to speak for me at my church. We just moved into a new building in 1994. And he spoke that night. Next day, I was taking him to the airport. He said, what are you doing the end of January? I said, I don't know. I mean, that's a few weeks away. He said, I'm going to Norway. I want you to go with me. I said, well, I'll pray about it. He said, you don't have to pray about it. He said, the Lord told me you were supposed to go. And he's got a prophetic type of ministry. I said, if the Lord told you to go, then I need to go. He said, well, here's the name and a number in Norway. Reach out to this guy. Well, it was Augie Olashir, the guy that had sat with me at Rhema. He said, call his church office and tell them that I invited you to come with me, and I'll meet you in Oslo on this day. It was about 3 weeks away. I called the office, told them who it was, and I said, Augie Olashear. I said, that's crazy. I mean, all those years had passed, about 10 years, 9 years. So I ended up flying Norway, got a plane fare to go to Norway, met Rick Godwin there. And when I saw Augie there at the church, it was a big church. They were running about 3,500 people. He had an international camp meeting every summer. People come in from 30 nations around the world, 8 or 10,000 people in attendance.
Wow.
And there I was with them. And Ray McCauley from South Africa. I think there were several. Jerry Savelle, some other ones speaking in that conference. I was just there with Rick Godwin. But I met Augie, and Augie, he said, hey, do you remember sending me $100 way back? I said, yeah. I said, been like 9 or 10 years. He said, that meant a lot to me. I was just launching in ministry after I left Rhema that first year. And I said, amazing that we've got reconnected. Well, from that meeting that I went to with Rick Godwin, the next year I went back to speak in that conference. And I've said then, I said, when I remember walking out on stage, that humongous church, 100,000 square foot auditorium, people from 30 nations, 8 or 10,000 people. I said there was more people in attendance in that church service than was in the whole county that I grew up in. And it was a little bit scary for me. But I preached in that conference. And from that, the door opened to go all over Europe and Scandinavia. I mean, from that meeting, people connected with me. So that was probably my first time ever going overseas. I think that was my first overseas trip was in 1994.
No,
And from 50 trips.
you told
So
me
that's how the missions, even though I wanted to do it years before that.
Yeah. You told me about the countries that you've been to. I mean, and your brother's been involved as far as in your mission work as well. Can you share with us of, the countries that you've been to and the work you and your brother did? I believe it was in Ecuador.
Well, we've been in Bolivia. He had outreach in Bolivia. Well, from that first meeting that I went to in Norway, it opened the door to Scandinavia. And I ended up doing a lot of meetings in Scandinavia, in Norway and Sweden and upper part of Finland and over into Russia. But after I made that first trip, I thought, man, this is exciting. And this is my heart. This is what I grew up wanting to do, was missions outreach around the world, even though I didn't want to go necessarily and live long-term on the mission field. So after the first trip, I started taking people to Norway with me, taking teams with me. Well, my twin brother, he was a builder at the time. He had a construction company building custom homes. And he went on one of those trips with me to Norway. I took he and his wife and a team of about 10 or 12 people. We went to Norway and into Russia, to Murmansk, Russia.
Wow.
And we were doing meetings at night and street events, that type of stuff. Well, he got bit by the missions bug. My twin brother did. And we came home. He said, the Lord's called me to do missions. I'm called to missions work. So he started his own ministry back then called Kingdom Builders International. I think it was Kingdom Builders something. And that same missionary that had taught us in 4th grade was in Ecuador back then, had moved to Bolivia, and he had a ministry in the jungle. So my brother said, hey, do you remember Brother Jack Spears, that our school teacher? I said, yeah. He said, I've reached out to him and he wants me to come to Bolivia. So he went down to Bolivia just as a scouting trip to see what's going on there, and fell in love with the people. A lot of kids without parents, orphan kids in the jungle villages. A lot of drugs, alcohol there, believe it or not. I mean, it's a mess in a lot of those places. And the kids were dirty and hungry. So he came back and we began to raise funds for him to go and build a feeding center in the jungle in Bolivia. Renabaki, I think it was called. It was down in the jungle outside of La Paz. So he built a feeding center there, and we raised probably a couple of $100,000 for him to do that. And a guy who had been on staff with me at my church in Tallahassee was then pastoring the church where my brother attended about 60 miles away. So we built a team, a missions team, and we started taking teams on the mission field. But my brother would go as a builder. And we built orphanages, we built medical centers, we built pastors' homes, we built schools. Um, Really, the first outreach like that was in Bolivia, doing the feeding center, and he would feed those kids. I don't know, 250, 300 kids, 3 meals a week, and we built dormitories that would house about 80 people could come in at one time and stay there. So he had the feeding center going for a lot of years, and people from my church and their church and other churches, because I had a network of ministries called Fellowship of Pentecostal Faith Ministries at the time. There was about 100 people in that fellowship of ministry that I had going, and we'd meet once a month. And out of that, they got connected with our missions ministry, and had people from various churches going on these missions trips with us. Sometimes we'd take as many as 20, 25. And Trinidad, Tobago, South America, an easy place, not a hard place, but an easy place to go. We had some connections there through a Rhema graduate who had graduated with me that was in Trinidad, South America. So he had us come down there. We helped build a church there, and worked on that church for years. Other teams came from Canada and around the world to work on that church. We helped build that church in Sistersville, Trinidad, outside of San Fernando. But then my brother and his pastor, who had been on staff with me, had served in Africa with Ralph Hagemeyer in the Congo and in Tanzania. So my brother and his wife, and that pastor and his wife, and a couple of ladies from my church, they set out to go to Africa for, I think, about a month, 3 weeks to 4 weeks. So literally, my brother started traveling around the world. He ended up going all over, but he was a builder. He a builder by trade.
Sure.
And he could preach. He'd minister and do whatever he had to do. He was not necessarily a preacher. Never been to Bible college. I ordained him through my church, and from there, I had a couple that ended up moving to Tallahassee that were part of Dr. Fusia Pickett and Judson Cornwall's ministry, and they had been on the mission field before somewhere, but they wanted to go to the Marshall Islands. So they set out, we helped raise funds to get them to the Marshall Islands. They went there for several years. Then my brother went to the Marshall Islands, lived for about 6 months, building a ministry there, building buildings on the ministry in the Marshall Islands. So he's lived in various places. He went to live in Guatemala, building a youth facility for Mario and Suzanne Babarsky, I think, down in the Patan region of Guatemala. We built medical centers in Haiti, orphanages in Haiti. We built schools and churches all over Bahamas, especially on the island of Eleuthera. Been many trips to Eleuthera in the Bahamas and to Haiti, doing a lot down in that area. But outreach in Mexico, all over. I mean, there's just so many different places.
Let me ask you this, as a pastor of a church that's mission minded, what do you think the results is of you being a pastor and your church being involved in missions? I can't remember the name of the gentleman. I mentioned to you the pastor's name that wrote that book about missions. He's a Assemblies of God pastor in Florida. Again, I cannot remember him, but he more or less said that if you want your church to be blessed, you need to be involved in missions. I mean, how do you see your church being involved in missions? What do you think the result of being involved in missions, being connected to missions? What do you think it did for your church?
Well, we were known in Tallahassee, and I'm no longer pastor anymore, but for years we were known in Tallahassee as the missions-minded church. I remember the newspaper come out one time to do an interview with me concerning our Word Explosion camp meeting that we did every summer. And when it came out in the newspaper, it came out as the missions-minded church. And in front of our building, we had out on the main highway, we had a huge building. Out on the main highway, we had probably 50 flags of the nations along the highway in front of our church, along with the U.S. flag and the Christian flag and the Florida flag. But we had a lot of the international flags out in a display on huge flagpoles in front of our church, similar to what John Osteen had at his church at the old Lakewood Church. He was one of my favorite preachers, and I guess I got a lot from him in regard to world missions because he was a missions-minded pastor himself, and that church was a missions-minded church. But I would have to say, Sean, the one thing that I think our church benefited the most through all of those years of us being a missions outreach church is that it helped to take the focus off of the people and their needs to see that there were people around the world that had needs greater than what they had.
Sure.
And anytime I would tell our people, and a lot of them went on the mission field at various times to different places. Some of them would go, they'd tell me, I want to go to an easy place. I don't want to go to a place that was hard. Haiti was probably one of the hardest places I've ever been. Haiti was a tough, difficult place to go, even for a week to 10 days. And I was reluctant to take some people there because I thought some of them were too soft. I thought they won't last. I'll have to send them back after a day or two, because you can't. A lot of times you couldn't bathe. You bathe out of a Dixie cup best you can in the morning. Brush your teeth a little bit, and may not get a bath for days. And I said, there's some of these people who can't take that. But even in Trinidad, some places that we stayed in Trinidad was a little bit difficult too. So I had some people, very professional people in their occupation. I took to Trinidad, and the first day or two, I thought I was going to have to send them back. And I just had to tell them, okay, just shut up, get still, get quiet, find out if God told you to come here. If he told you to come here, you can last, you can make this thing work. And then they'd go back a second time, but they had to find out in their heart that God had sent them there. But I think probably the greatest benefit of us being a missions church was that it helped our people see that there were other people that were in need, and that their need wasn't the only thing in their life they had to look out for.
Mm-hmm.
People that needed a whole lot more than they needed.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe, as far as for my own life, missions did exactly what you just said. It changed everything once I became connected to missions.
I remember one time we went to Haiti. We were building an orphanage in Haiti, and I can't think of the year, probably 1999, 98, 99, went a number of times. But the pastor of my brother's church, he was on staff at my church at that time as a full-time missions director. I had a full-time missions director. That's all he did was world missions. And we did an annual missions conference at my church and brought in speakers from around the world to come to that. Some of the people would bring missionaries just to come sit in meetings so they could get edified and get away from their country and have a vacation. Mm-hmm. So we put them up, take care of them, give them some spending money to go to the mall, and they get to enjoy that for a week and then go back home, because I knew it was going to be hard when they went back. But his pastor, who had been on staff with me for about 10 years, he said, why don't we do a shoe drive and let's purchase 400 or 500 pairs of shoes, or get shoes given to a church, and we'll take some Action Packers lock boxes to Haiti with us, and we'll take all these shoes and give them away. So we did. We took hundreds and hundreds of pairs of shoes, all kind of shoes. And I remember going to an orphanage, and I don't know, there was a couple of hundred kids in that orphanage. And we brought those Action Packers with shoes, and they thought we were Santa Claus. It was crazy. Those kids were loving on us, kissing on us. It was the thing you've ever seen. And they were speaking French Creole, which I don't speak, but you knew the love was there because they were expressing it. But it was probably the first new pair of shoes those kids ever had.
Yeah.
Amazing. And we saw that in various places. In Trinidad, in Eleuthera, in the Bahamas. Eleuthera is it's not impoverished, but it's not a wealthy place either. And we had an orphanage and a school there and a church there that we worked with for many, many years.
Okay, so you have a pastor that is contemplating missions. He feels like he should be out in the mission field. He should be involved in missions, but maybe he's got burnt in the past. Maybe he doesn't know what to do. What would be your advice to him?
Pray. I think the first thing a person needs to pray. If someone doesn't have a heart for missions, then I don't know if they have a heart for God. Mm-hmm. The Word of God is so full of I don't want to say commands, but I think it's God's word to us to reach out to the less fortunate. And several scriptures are important to me in Nehemiah chapter 8, where he said, you've eaten the fat, you drink the sweet, send portions to whom nothing's been prepared. That's always been one of my mission scriptures, because we've eaten the fat, we've drank the sweet. Now there's people out there whom nothing's been prepared for, and we get to take that to them. And then in Psalms, he said, ask of me for the nations, and I'll give them to you as an inheritance. So I think as a pastor, it was always in my heart, even from my early childhood days, because of the church that I was raised in. But for those who haven't had an introduction to missions, I think they just need to pray and ask God to put that in them, And he'll put it there. If you're sincere, he'll put that there because his heart is for the nations too, and the less fortunate. One of the most primitive places I've ever been, this will be a shock, was in the northern part of Russia. Russia, and I'm thinking superpower, world superpower. That's all we've ever heard of, Russia and the Soviet Union. I went there in 1998. There was an American missionary pastoring Murmansk Christian Center. Last name Webster. He was from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Rhema grad. We went there, fabulous church. I don't know, a church of 700-800 people, the most dynamic praise and worship I've ever seen in my life. I mean, they were wild. They were radical praise and worship. But they had just recently come out of communism and all of that. The wall had fallen in Berlin, all that. They were free, man. I'm telling you, that was the most expressive worship I've ever seen. But they took us into the northern part of Russia, Murmansk. I mean, it's primitive. Houses had outhouses for bathrooms. There was electricity. There was no running water. We watched people washing their clothes in the streams like I did in Haiti. It was primitive. And some of those people were the most loving people, kind, sincere people. And you just look in their eyes and you see they need God. They need God in their life. So I would say to a pastor that maybe doesn't have a missions program, doesn't have a desire for mission, if you'll ask God what he wants you to do, I think that he'll put it in your heart to reach out. Now, your mission field may not be necessarily overseas. There are missions that go on all around the United States on the Navajo reservation, the Appalachians. I mean, we've had people to go to the Indian reservations and do ministry. So a mission field can be anywhere, but I happen to be brought up in a church that had world missions as the thrust of the church.
Well, okay, so now that you brought that up, and I was actually thinking about that scripture, because obviously Jesus said to go to some Jerusalem, Samaria, Judea, and all the other ends of the earth. I may have those towns backwards, but what I'm saying is, some pastors might just say, hey, I'm doing the Jerusalem. That's what God's called me to. Obviously they're talking about their local community, and they don't feel like as if, the Judea, Samaria, or the other ends of the earth should be on their radar. But like you're saying, it's not necessarily global missions, but maybe an international mission or national missions. What do you believe?
Well, missions by and large, when you say mission, most people think overseas. Mm-hmm. And that's important. I think that's probably the greatest part of missions that a person could have is overseas, getting away from where you live. I mean, out of your backyard. But there's missions around the world. I was a senior chaplain in the state prison system for 2 years here in Florida in 2015, 16, and part of 17. And my God, that state prison had 2,100 inmates, and it was a mission field. I led hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of inmates to the Lord and the baptism of the Holy Spirit. We saw healings and everything else. And my dear God, that is a evil environment in a state prison. You talk about people that are destitute in the prison system, they need God. So to me, that was part of a missions program too. And we supported that missions program there at the prison out of my church, and Bibles and books and various things. I ordered books from all over the country to have sent into that prison for the prison library, and videos and all kind of stuff. But I had an uncle some years ago. He said to me, he said, I know you go all over the world. He said, why do you want to do that when there's needy people right here in our neighborhood? I said, because that's what God put in my heart. Mm-hmm. I said, the places here in the neighborhood, you go to those and I'll go overseas. And it kind of shut that conversation up, But he said, he said something to me. He said, why would you go over there when there's people here that are just as needy? But I grew up in a church with a world missions international vision. And in our church in Tallahassee, at the peak of our church, I think there was a flag for every nation, 193, 195 nations of the world. We had a flag of every nation hanging in our huge sanctuary. And when people come in, they looked and they were kind of awestruck by all the way around that big auditorium. There was a flag representing some country. And I remember when the Iraq and Afghanistan war broke out, I had those flags hanging in there. And I had people who got offended by it. Why do you have those in there? I said, my God, if anybody needs Jesus, they do. So, but our church always had a missions outreach. It always had that thrust because the pastor did. A church will never rise above its leader. Whatever that leader is, that church is going to typically take on that nature and characteristic of that pastor. If that pastor doesn't have a missions vision, then more than likely the church won't. If the pastor is not going to last there.
In closing, I just kind of feel compelled to ask you, do you have anything else to share in your heart? Maybe it's on your heart about missions that you may want to share with those that's watching this video?
Missions is important. I've got a friend, a Rhema grad. He left. He and his wife have a Bible school in Kenya. Billy Banks and his wife, Eltha. They left a couple of weeks ago. He's been in Kenya now for 10 or 12 years, started a Bible school. It's flourishing. About every 6 months, I do I speak to the students through my phone in a live conversation to them. He'll gather all the students over there together, and there's 60 or 70 students in the Bible school, and speak to them. And every time when I hang the phone up, I mean, it's a little bit of a delay in the voice, and when you're doing it like that, it can be annoying at times, be a little aggravating at times the way you have to do it. But each time when I hang up the phone, I think, Lord, take what I've shared today and let it be a blessing. And they were here back in the spring for a few weeks, coming home to see their kids and grandkids. He told me, he said, that last message you shared to our students, he said, they're still talking about it. To say, and I think I just shared with them 5 or 6 keys for victorious living. And he said, they're still talking about your message. So I would say to those that see this video presentation, let God speak to your heart about world evangelism. And let God speak to your heart. Even if you don't go, you can always give. I was doing a missions conference at our church probably 20 years ago. There was a young guy that had just got saved in our church. He'd come out of the drug culture. His life was a wreck. And it was a Sunday morning, and I was speaking. I was sharing about world evangelism. And I said something in a sermon that really rubbed him the wrong way. And I said that day, I said, the key to world evangelism is finances. And I heard somebody say something, and I didn't know what they said because, we had hundreds of people there. I couldn't tell where it came from. And after the service over, I'm out in the foyer greeting people, thanking them for coming to church. And he comes up, he said, I've got issue with something you said today. I said, what did I say? He said, you said the key to world evangelism was finances. I said, yeah. I said, I meant that. He said, no, it's not. The key to world evangelism is love. I said, well, I said, have you ever been overseas? He said, no. He said, I don't have any desire to go overseas. I said, I've been overseas at that time, probably 25 times. I said, I'm going to encourage you to find a place to go overseas. Call Delta and tell them you want to buy a ticket, but you want to put it on your love card. I said, and then call the hotel, wherever you're going to stay on en route, and tell them you want a room, but you're going to put on your love card. He said, that'd be crazy. I said, the love card's not going to get you very far. I said, it's going to take finances to do world evangelism. So even if a person can't go on the mission field, maybe it's going to take an act of God to get them up to get them to do that. They can still give toward world evangelism, and just talk to God about it. If you have a pure heart about world missions and evangelism, He's going to speak to you. I'll tell you, He won't let that go unchecked.
Well, that's Larry. It was really nice talking to you. I just think it's such an encouragement to hear, of you and what you've done. And then, you're challenging me, honestly. I'm sitting here thinking, as soon as I get done with this, I'm going to have a long talk with God, about making sure my heart is open for anything else and more of what He wants to do in my life through missions. So I think you've been such an encouragement with all of us.
This morning, I texted one of my spiritual sons who's pastoring a church about 20, 25 miles from me, and told him, I said, I'm doing a Zoom call today with a missionary, American missionary that's in Honduras. And I said, do you want to go? And he texted right back. He said, absolutely, as soon as you're ready. So I've got some folks, we're going to make it down to Honduras. I don't know when we'll get there. We're going to make it down there. And I feel a connection. I told him, I said, I feel like there's been a divine connection I've made here with Sean over the last couple of months. And we want to be able to be a part of it, either to come down there, giving, helping, whatever we can do. Maybe at some point we'll make a trip down there.
Wow, what an honor. I really appreciate that. And if you say I'm coming, I'll be there at the airport to pick you guys up.
We're going to make it down there. I've got a couple of these pastors that probably want to come with me. I've drug them to places where they would have never dreamed that they would go. Tell you a little bit of a story. I may have told you this last time. One of the trips into Bolivia that we went on, my brother told me, he said, I'm going to show you something that most people in the world never seen before. And I said, what is it? He said, well, you'll see. Did I tell you this?
No, huh?
I said, okay. He said, I'm going to, they don't have cars where he was at in the village, have some motorcycles for taxis. So there was about 8 of us from my church that went. And next to the last day we were there, the end of the week, he said, I'm going to take you guys to show you something that most people in the world could never see. I said, okay. So he rents these motorcycles with a driver. We get on the back of a motorcycle and we start out through the woods in the wilderness. And where it's just a little pig trail. And we go for miles. Then we come to a river. The river is only about 6 or 8 inches deep, but the motorcycles, we go across the river, little stream, get to the other side. We go another 5 miles into the jungle. And I thought, my God, where is he taking us? And finally, we come to the end. It's a dead end. And I asked my twin brother, I said, where are we going? He said, you'll see. He said, I've told you all along, you're going to see something most people in the world have never seen. So parked the motorcycles. The drivers on the motorcycle waiting there for us. He took us on these trails through the woods. We went way down. And as we got down probably a quarter mile, half mile down that trail, all of a sudden you could hear voices. So we come into this clearing. There's thatched huts, just thatched roofs, like tents with thatched roofs, palm branches. And there was a village, an Indian village. That may have been the Quechua Indians, one of the Indian tribes there in the jungle of Bolivia. We come in there and you could hear the talking, singing, dogs barking. We come to this village, 75, 80 people, not a stitch of clothes on. No woman, no child had any clothes on, butt naked. He said, is this National Geographic or what? I said, I would have never believed there was a place like this in the world. He said, I came in here a while back. I brought a doctor in from La Paz, Bolivia, came here. He said, I think 60 or 70 people in that Indian tribe there tested positive for TB. They sleep on the wet ground. Mm-hmm. Most of those kids had never seen a toothbrush, never seen a comb, no hygienics at all. I mean, nothing. And it opened my eyes that there's a world out there that most people could never fathom. That one time in my life, I saw something that I thought a fraction of 1% of people in this world ever seen anything like that and probably didn't even know it existed. But I've had some fabulous experiences on the world. And one of the things that touched my heart the most was probably in 1997, I took a team from my church to Norway. We went up into northern Norway, way above the Arctic Circle. It's cold. Even it snowed in the end of June. And we visited a couple from Australia, New Zealand that was there with some geological survey team that had come into Tromsø, the town that I flew into. They had come in there once or twice over a year's period to the church to visit. And the pastor told us, I've got a missionary team coming from America. When we come to the north, we're going to come visit. So we went there and visited that couple. They had a baby. The baby was just a few months old. And the baby had some type of heart defect. It was born with a heart defect. And way up there where they lived, there was no doctors. I mean, they had to go back to Tromsø in the big city to see a doctor. But one of the guys in my church, not me, he was not a pastor, he was a musician. He was a guitar player. He prayed over that baby that day. It was one of the most awesome anointed prayers I've ever heard. He prayed over that baby and called forth a miracle. We left that place. End of the week, we came home. A few weeks later, the pastor called me from the north of Norway, said he had seen that couple. They'd come back to town, had that baby tested, and they could not find one thing wrong with the baby. And he said, your trip to Norway was worth that. And when I told my guitar player about it, he cried. I mean, he broke down and cried. I said, see, I didn't do the praying. Other pastor didn't do the praying. You as the guitar player did the praying, and God used you in that one trip. He went back to Norway numerous times with me on many trips after that, but it touched his life. And that's probably one of the most awesome experiences that I've ever had on the mission field.
Wow. That is just absolutely amazing.
It was worth spending all that money to go to see that child healed.
I mean, you're writing a book, so I can imagine all the stories that you could put in that book.
Oh yeah. I've got some good stories in the book.
Yeah. All right, Larry, it was awesome talking to you. I greatly appreciate you taking the time and jumping on the Zoom call here with us and sharing about your heart about missions and your life. And, also you mentioned to me about writing a book. When is that book going to be done?
I'm hoping the book will be published by the 1st of September. It's taken a long time to do it. I didn't have a clue what all I was doing when I started the book. It's a lot involved in writing a book. The manuscript's basically done. It's being proofread and edited right now, and then it'll be put in book form, and then hopefully it'll be published by Amazon. Maybe it'll be out by the 1st of September. And it's simply called Lessons Learned on Route 66, my 66 years of living.
So I'll put that into this video here so people can see that and mark it and then look for it in the future. So, well, again, thank you so much. God bless you. It was awesome, like I said, talking to you.
All right. God bless, Sean.